Hello and welcome. While Leonard Nimoy will forever be remembered as the Vulcan officer aboard the Starship Enterprise, he was a man of many talents. Nimoy was born in Boston, Massachusetts to Ukrainian-Jewish immigrants, served in the US Army and at one point in his career owned an exotic pet shop. He was also a poet and an author. And in parallel with his Star Trek commitments, he accepted many other acting roles in television shows as well as appearing on stage in shows like Camelot, Fiddler on the Roof and Oliver. But it was when the producers were pondering whether to make a third Star Trek movie that he would accept the biggest professional challenge of his career, to help resurrect his own character and direct himself in Star Trek: The Search for Spock.
My first time out as a Star Trek director.
Now, well, you obviously had more than enough of the feel for the whole thing, but it must have been very close to you. Did you find it difficult to sort of distance it and get a bit of perspective?
Well, yes and no. I suppose, on the one hand, you're right, you need some objectivity so that you can get a sense of the whole picture, because obviously directing the picture is quite different than simply playing one of the characters. On the other hand, I think it's my closeness to the material that I was kind of counting on to help me through and to have this picture have the feeling of an insider. For me, it does. I hope it does for the audience. I really felt all along that the one thing that I could bring to it, more than any other director coming in, would be my inside sense of the characters and the atmosphere that makes Star Trek work for me. Now, it's a very personal point of view, and Star Trek is a lot of things to a lot of different people. Some say they love one thing about it, some say they love another. I have my own personal feelings about what makes good Star Trek, and I wanted it to feel close to me in that sense.
Okay, well, can I stop you there and let's examine that for a bit. What do you feel makes good Star Trek material?
Well, it's a combination. It's a combination of a lot of elements, but my feeling is that the first two films, we really didn't capture much of the interplay of the characters. With the exception of the death of Spock at the end of Star Trek II, the picture was essentially an adventure, a space adventure. And that's fine. I think it was a good film, and audiences enjoyed it. But I didn't feel until in either one or two that we were really playing on the relationships between these people very much. And my hope was that I would be able to find a combination of the use of the characters played against an adventure and a scientific story that would bring it all together. I just felt we hadn't done that yet, and now I feel that's done, we can go on to something else. But for me, the characters are very important. I think the audience has always enjoyed seeing these characters and their relationship to each other. I wanted to do a story about loyalty. To me, that's what Star Trek 3 is really about. It's the loyalty these people feel for each other and for their friend Spock, and they put their careers on the line to go out and see if they can help him.
Right.
Have you seen the film?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Yeah, well, I've seen the three of them. One thing, did you know at the end of shooting of the second film that you would be doing the third film?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So how did... Was that your sort of initiation, or not initiation, but initiative?
Yeah. When we finished with Star Trek II, when I finished acting on the picture, my last scene was the death of Spock, and we had no plans at that particular point in time to do anything more with the character. The studio, before they released the film, felt that they wanted to lay in. If you remember, there was a kind of a teaser shot laid in which showed us Spock's tube laying on the Genesis planet, and that really was an afterthought which they developed after I had finished working on the film. When the film was released, Star Trek II, they called me and asked me for a meeting, and at that meeting they asked me if I would care to have any involvement with Star Trek 3, and I said I would like to direct it. And that's how it all started.
Aha. Well, now that's interesting. When they said, did you want to have any involvement, did they mean initially Did you want the character to come back again?
Well, of course they wanted Spock back.
Right.
But we had no contract, so there was no nothing decisive until we had these discussions. I said I wouldn't mind coming back as Spock, but I felt very strongly about directing the picture, and I must say they responded to that very well. They were very receptive.
What, you were able to resolve the director side of it almost immediately, or did you have to negotiate?
Yeah, very quickly. There wasn't any conflict about it. I had a couple of meetings over a period of 3 or 4 weeks with various executives in the studio, and told them my feelings about what Star Trek 3 should be about and how I would go about doing it, and the response was very good.
Right. I think it would help me, certainly writing from this far away, if I could talk to you a little bit about your own relationship with the character. I mean, at the end of the television series, had you just about got to the point of being fed up with playing Spock and wanting to get away as an actor?
I'm sorry?
And as an actor, did you want to get away and create a whole new range of characters?
Well, I'd say I had very mixed feelings, frankly, John. The problem was not so much that I was fed up with the character, but that I felt that during the 3rd season, with Gene Roddenberry gone, and with the network really being not terribly supportive of the show, that we were not doing our best work. And I thought we had done some very good work, and I really felt that we were in danger of sliding into a very mediocre kind of production that I didn't want to be a part of. And in that sense, I was relieved that we didn't go on, because it just didn't seem as though we had done our best work, and we might not be able to stay at that level. I thought if we couldn't get back to doing the best work that we had done, then it might be better to end it. I didn't want to see it end.
No.
But under those circumstances, I thought maybe it was best to finish with it.
Right. So there wasn't any sort of desire from you personally to shed the Spock skin, so to speak, and get out and
not at that point. The frustrating period for me began in the mid 70s or early 70s. I'm talking about 12 years ago, 72 or 73, when we had this enormous growth of interest in Star Trek, when the show was so successful in syndication in the States and all around the world. But there was no Star Trek to do.
Mm.
And audiences were demanding Star Trek and wanting Star Trek, and there was nothing any of us could do about it, because Paramount and the network simply were not going to put it back on the air. So that was a frustrating time when I'd be going out and doing other things, and people would keep talking to me about Star Trek, and I'd say to myself, my gosh, that's over. I don't know what I can do about that. Let's try to get on with it here.
Mm.
So actually, in 79, when we did the first Star Trek movie, it was a relief, because we now had something to offer those people who have been so anxious to have more Star Trek for so many years.
Right. At that point when they came back and said, we want to make a movie now, how many of the people initially didn't want to do it?
I'm not sure that anybody didn't want to do it. I think everybody's concern was, how good is it going to be?
Mm. Mm.
How serious is the studio about making a really good film?
Yeah, because you had at that stage, of course, Star Wars had come out, and
right.
a new standard of science fiction had been set, I think.
Right. And the question that I had was, do they simply want to make a quick, cheap film called Star Trek because they've suspected there's some money out there, or are we really going to try to get back to doing serious work?
Mm.
I mean, the best of Star Trek, In other words, are we going to add something to the body of work called Star Trek, or are we simply going to rip it off?
Yeah.
That was the concern.
What assurance did you get? Where did you know that you were going to get a good quality product?
Well, Gene Roddenberry was very actively involved, so I thought that was going to be enormously helpful. And then when Robert Wise became the director of the film, he's a man who's won 4 Academy Awards, has done some pretty classy films in his time.
Yes.
I thought we've got a chance. And then when they announced the budget, which was, to begin with, was $15 million, it sounded like a reasonable budget to begin with. It escalated eventually to over 40. But at least going in, I had the sense that the people involved had good intentions.
So, what was the budget on Star Trek 3?
16 million.
16 million?
Yeah.
Well, that's very tight. I mean, by Hollywood standards, that's...
not a lot of money.
Not a lot of money at all, no.
No. Star Trek 2 was done for around 13 something.
Right. So, let's talk a little bit about Star Trek 3. What input did you have into the actual storyline?
Well, quite a bit. I was working. Harv Bennett wrote the story and the screenplay, and I was working with him very early on. I think I started working with him probably about 8 or 9 months before we actually started filming the picture. And I guess probably the best way to describe our relationship was that he was the writer and I was his editor.
Yes, I can understand that.
Yeah.
So what was it? What did you talked about the relationship that you wanted, the relationships with the various characters that you wanted to get across. But beyond that, what kind of a concept did you have for the film? I mean, the look of the film. Were you trying to?
I wanted the film to grow in size and dimension, to become rather operatic. And I kept talking about operatic size and operatic emotions to the various people, the art director, to Harv, who was writing it, to the art director who had designed the sets and the look of it, to the special effects people, Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's company, who did special effects, cinematographer. The climax of that for me is the fight scene between Kirk and Krug fighting on the edge of a mountain with smoke and fire and music going. I just kept yelling operatic. I want it very big and I want it very passionate. Lots of emotion.
Well, one of the things that struck me with the first film and with each of the two subsequent ones is the difference in pace compared with, I'm thinking particularly of the Star Wars trilogy and so on.
Yeah. Well, we are very different in that respect. There's no question about it. When an audience goes to see Star Wars, I sense that as soon as people stop running and shooting and chasing and jumping and fighting, and as soon as they stop all that and start talking, the audience gets restless. And I think with the Star Trek audience is quite different. I think they really sit there and absorb the information. So we consciously, I think, should pace ourselves differently. We are a different kind of film. Now, I know that there are people who say, "Hey, you're a science fiction space film. Give us action.
Right?
Give us more action." We must not try to be like Star Wars. We must not try to step into their territory. They do an entirely different kind of film. And I think our audiences would feel cheated if we simply gave them action without some substance and content for them to think about. You see?
Right. Well, but yes, I agree with you, and that's obviously quite true. But I know some of the people who were at the screening. It was a special preview screening in a theaterette here, not a mass public screening. But people were mumbling, saying, gee, if it was just a little bit quicker and if it just moved along a bit faster, it'd be so much better.
Okay. What can I say?
Well, what I'm wondering is, did you deliberately keep it at? I mean, there's one thing to have action, and there's another thing to balance it with the drama and exchanges of dialogue and so on. But in the cutting
I wouldn't say that we deliberately pace ourselves slow. I think we tell our story the way we feel it should be told.
Yeah.
And if it's too slow for some, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think, as I say.
Right.
So, yeah, huh?
No, I guess that would have been your answer, actually.
Yeah.
But
I do think that we have to face the fact that with Indiana Jones, with Raiders of the Lost Ark, with Star Wars and the Jedi films, audiences have become accustomed to a dazzling kind of activity on that screen. And if that's the way it is, so be it. But I'm not saying our film is fast enough. I mean, it may be too slow for some. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that I do think that there is a climate which says it's science fiction, it's space, move it.
Right.
Get those ships moving, get those ships fighting, get those people running and jumping.
Right.
We have never really been that way.
Right. Well, one of the aspects that you've already mentioned, and which obviously is, when anybody stops and thinks about it, is key, and that is the mix of the characters and the conflict and so on, and particularly the I think conflict is the right word. Conflict between the crew being just average human beings and Spock being, well, what he is.
Right.
And yet you left it right until the very, very end of the picture for Spock to come back in. Do you think in retrospect perhaps that it could have been structured in such a way that Spock was back on the scene perhaps 2/3 of the way through the film?
I suppose we could have. I'm sure that a good writer could sit down and write the story that way. I always felt it would be anticlimactic that once Spock arrived, then the curiosity on that subject would be over.
Yes.
And you'd have to go into another phase of storytelling. So my sense of structure told me that we should save it for the very end,
right,
and keep the suspense about what we were going to finally find in the way of the Spock that we know.
Right.
It's just a matter of choice.
Right.
Good or bad, it's a matter of choice.
Right. I'll tell you what my anticipation was as the story was starting to unfold was that the crew would be pushed into a desperate situation, would just manage to find Spock to fight off the Klingons and so on, and that he would be there for that last third of the film to help them. But you could say that I was surprised by it taking another turn. What about in the actual hands-on making of the film there on the locations? What were some of the toughest scenes, and were there any sort of offbeat and strange occurrences happening that weren't in the script?
I'll tell you what I hadn't anticipated. There was one really, really difficult thing that I had to do. There's a scene in the sick bay on the Klingon ship, on the Klingon bird of prey, when Spock is laying there unconscious, and Dr. McCoy is talking to him. And I had to be laying there on that bed with my eyes closed while the camera was rolling on the scene. And I couldn't see what he was doing. So I really was straining to try, just through hearing and sensing him, to try to decide if the performance was all there. If it was going to be right. And D. Kelly kept complaining that I was like moving my eyelids almost as though I was directing him with my eyelids. So that was kind of tough.
Yeah.
I had to rely on him and people who were watching the scene to tell me whether or not they felt the scene was right, because I had to close my eyes and couldn't watch it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I hadn't anticipated that. I thought, I don't have any problem. I think I can handle this,
Yeah.
So when I got to that scene, suddenly I realized I wouldn't be able to watch the damn scene.
What about any... Do things sort of go wrong at all with the special effects and that sort of thing on a film the size of Star Trek?
Well, you have your occasional situations that don't work out exactly right, but by and large, these guys these special effects people are so professional, and so experienced that they generally can tell you pretty much exactly what's going to happen. When we filmed, for example, the destruction on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yes.
I think I had 4 cameras rolling on that scene, and if it hadn't gone right, it would have been terrible, because it would have cost us a lot of time to reconstruct everything and put it all back together again. But and they took a long time to set it up. We started very early in the morning setting up all those explosions and people flying through the air and so forth. But we didn't shoot it until about 9 o'clock at night. But boy, when it went, it was spectacular. It went exactly as they said it would. The doors blew open, and Kirk's chair exploded, and the Klingon came flying across the camera, and It was all there. These guys are spectacular. They know exactly what they're doing. I wouldn't trust anybody but these professionals to do a job.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you have to, the thing about it is, you have to give them their head. You have to tell them what you hope to accomplish. You have to let them tell you exactly how they want to do it and exactly what's going to happen, and even ask them, where should I put my cameras?
Right.
You're going to tell me which way things are going to go here. And they're very good at that, and I try not to put any pressure on them, try not to rush them. They're dealing with explosives, they're dealing with stuff that can hurt people. So to me, it's very important that I rely on them and let them feel that they're secure in what they're doing.
Right, right. Tell me something, you know, we keep hearing about the vast number of Trekkies, or even here in Australia, but approximately how many are there supposed to be members of Star Trek clubs in America?
Oh, God, I have no idea. I have no idea. I suppose there are thousands and thousands for sure, but I wouldn't.
You've never sort of. Have you ever had to, because of the role, become involved with it, or are you hounded by Trekkies at all?
No, I have had my share of that. I just came back from Germany. I was there last week. The picture is opening there about a week from now, and we needed help to get me out of airports and into cars, and out of cars into hotels. There were big crowds and a lot of press. Very intense reaction. So I've had my share of that.
Right, right. And the picture itself in the States, what sort of business has it done up to now?
The last figure I heard was around $76 or $77 million. It's running about, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 million ahead of Star Trek II.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
The obvious question, of course, is will there be a Star Trek IV?
Well, we're in the earliest stages of discussing that right now. The studio would definitely like to make another one, and we've just begun to discuss story ideas for the next picture.
And will you direct it?
Yes.
And of course, Leonard went on to direct and co-star in Star Trek IV before handing over the directorial duties in 1989 to William Shatner to direct Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. But Leonard kept working right up until the year before he passed away in 2015. His last role was providing his voice to a character in the video game version of The Family Guy. Leonard Nimoy was 83.